35 lives were swallowed by the sea in an instant, all because a buried lie festered beneath America's deadliest bridge collapse. For 11 years, officials knew the protective barriers guarding the Sunshine Skyway Bridge had corroded into nothingness. New vessels were crashing into its exposed skeleton. They knew a catastrophe was inevitable. They did nothing. A repair requiring $0 was ignored, a truth hidden until May 9, 1980, when a freighter pilot, blinded by an unforeseen tempest, made a choice that would fracture the sky. A bus filled with students, cars carrying families, a 150-foot fall into blackness. If you appreciate our historical content, we'd be grateful for your support. Please like and subscribe to help us continue sharing these stories. The Coast Guard blamed the captain. They blamed the weather, but the true killer was the lie they had buried long before the first victim struck the water. In the early part of the 20th century, St. Petersburg, Florida, was a town located on a coastal peninsula. Residents who wished to travel to locations across the bay were forced to either endure long drives or use ferry boats for their journey. A bridge was first proposed in 1926, and while the idea was popular, actual progress was delayed first by the Great Depression and later by the onset of World War II. It was not until 1954 that a bridge spanning the lower portion of Tampa Bay was finally completed. Built by Parsons, Brinkerhoff, Hogan, and McDonald, and named through a statewide contest, this bridge was a significant achievement. Though relatively narrow, it was the world's longest continuous bridge at the time, with a main section stretching 6.7 kilometers or 4.14 miles. It was a steel cantilever design, holding a two-lane roadway atop concrete piers set into the floor of the bay. A somewhat steep grade at each end allowed the bridge to rise high enough above the water so as not to obstruct the busy shipping lane passing beneath. The bridge was immensely popular, leading to the addition of a twin section in 1971 to ease congestion. This new span was essentially a duplicate, providing a second roadway so that traffic moving in opposite directions would have its own lane. While the bridge's height allowed ships to pass below, its concrete supports presented a danger to marine traffic. From 1969 to 1980, 7 vessels collided with these piers. Though almost every time the ships involved were quite small, the damage was minor, and the bridge's integrity was never compromised. This pattern held until May 9, 1980. At 6:30 a.m. that morning, experienced harbor pilot John Larrow was transported to the MV Summit Venture, a 186-meter or 609-foot-long bulk cargo ship. Larrow's job was to safely guide the ship out of the port. It was standard practice for large ships like the Summit Venture to use local, expert, and highly trained pilots for harbor maneuvers. After leaving the port, Larrow would leave the ship and the Summit Venture's own captain would take back control. The conditions that morning were unfavorable, with periods of rain and fog. Larrow had spent the early hours monitoring the weather, radioing at least one other ship near the Sunshine Skyway for updates on the situation. Though not perfect, visibility was still acceptable. Believing it was safe to proceed, Larrow began guiding the Summit Venture out from the harbor. As the freighter neared the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, a squall suddenly hit. Fierce wind, rain, and fog arrived without warning, the deluge so heavy it rendered the ship's radar useless. Larrow ordered lookouts to the front of the ship, where they had to visually locate channel markers. He proceeded with caution, telling the crew to get ready to drop anchor quickly if necessary. By this time, the Summit Venture had been pushed off course. Instead of heading for the bridge's main channel, it was drifting directly toward one of its concrete piers. Larrow, however, was unaware of this until the structure materialized from the fog directly ahead, only one ship's length away. Larrow commanded that the anchor be dropped and attempted a sharp turn, but it was too late. At 7:33 a.m., the freighter slammed into a main support pier of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. Almost immediately, a 395-meter or 1,297-foot segment of the southbound roadway fell straight into the bay below, taking several automobiles with it. Lero immediately sent an emergency call to the Coast Guard. Dispatch every emergency unit to the Skyway Bridge. A vessel has just hit the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge has fallen. Send every rescue unit to the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. This is a mayday. Major emergency. Stop cars on the Skyway Bridge. Stopping cars, however, could not be done at once. Above, one driver was moving slowly southbound when he noticed no vehicles were ahead of him on the bridge. He later described his experience to the National Transportation Safety Board. I saw the red aircraft warning lights on the bridge structure west of the road. Suddenly, those red lights dropped from their position to somewhere out of sight below the road in front of me. I started braking, and right after the lights fell, I saw the steel framework above collapsing ahead. It seemed to lean over and crumble as it went down. The man stopped his vehicle and began reversing backward. I likely reversed halfway to 2/3 of the way back down the upward slope I had just climbed. I saw headlights from southbound vehicles approaching my position, so I came to a stop, rolled down my left window, and started waving my arms outside, slapping the side of my car and yelling at oncoming traffic to stop. After I halted, I remember roughly 3 cars and then a bus driving southbound. Most of those vehicles, the bus included, could not stop in time when they reached the gap where the bridge was gone. They dropped into the bay below. The driver of the final car that managed to brake came to a stop with almost no room to spare. He got out of his vehicle, leaving it perched precariously at the very edge of the abyss. In total, 6 cars, 1 truck, and a Greyhound bus either fell during the initial collapse or were unable to stop before driving over the broken edge. The drop was considerable, approximately 46 meters or 150 feet. The National Transportation Safety Board later reported that damage to vehicles falling from the bridge into the water was consistent with the damage expected from impacting an unyielding surface. Only one person who went into the water survived. Wesley McIntyre, 56 years old, was in his vehicle when it fell during the bridge's initial failure. He later described how the sudden drop caused him to instinctively stamp on the brake pedal, an action he knew was pointless. His truck hit the side of the Summit Venture before entering the bay, after which Mr. McIntyre was able to struggle free and reach the surface. He was pulled from the water by the crew of the Summit Venture. Mr. McIntyre was the only survivor to be rescued in this manner. The other 35 individuals who went off the bridge inside their vehicles died in the water. 25 of the deceased were on the bus, a Greyhound carrying a number of students from Tuskegee University, among other passengers. In the aftermath of the tragedy, an investigation was launched. A Coast Guard inquiry placed blame on pilot John Lero's decision to proceed despite the deteriorating conditions, stating this contributed to the accident. However, it also recognized that a multitude of other factors played a part. These included the unpredictable suddenness of the squall and encouraging weather reports he had received from other ships in the vicinity at the time. It was also noted that the concrete piers were missing protective fenders. Wooden dolphins had been installed around the support bases when the bridge was built, but these had quickly deteriorated and were never replaced. In the end, Mr. Lero was cleared of any negligence, with the finding that he had taken reasonable actions based on the information and choices available to him.